These are the best and worst ultimate abilities in Apex Legends. Starting off in F tier, we've got Revenant's Ultimate. Now, we know there's rumors going around about a Revenant rework, and if that comes next season, this ranking could be totally moot. But for now, his ultimate remains one of the worst abilities in the game. Now, once upon a time, it was top tier, but with the visual and audio indicators it has now, well, it lets your opponents be aware of what's happening well before the rev push even gets close to you. It allows for most teams to be prepared, and that severely minimizes its utility. If you're solo queuing or you're just a part of an uncoordinated squad, this can also make the ability worse, because if teammates don't use it at the right time, or if the Revenant placing it doesn't put it in the right spot, it can wind up backfiring. And it's one of the few abilities where backfiring can end up getting you killed. So for now, Revenant's Ultimate is F tier. Before I move on to the rest, thank you to Raid Shadow Legends for sponsoring this video. Raid has over 700 unique champions. You can collect hundreds of powerful champions, and each have their own unique skills and abilities, so you're bound to find the one that's right for you. The game also has regular content updates, and it's constantly evolving with new modes, features, and quality of life updates to make the game even better. And last but certainly not least, it has an engaging PvP combat. You can take the world in Classic, Tag Team, and the newly added Live Arena. Rise up the ranks and prove yourself as the strongest summoner around. With Raid's new limited series on their YouTube channel, Call of the Arbiter, it has provided a bunch of brand new content in Raid Shadow Legends, including a free legendary champion, the Mighty Orc Warlord Artak. If you want to get him for free, all you have to do is log into Raid for 7 days between now and July 24th to claim this legend. Raid's honestly a worldwide phenomenon with over 400 million players, and you can join them today. New players, click my link or scan the QR code on the screen right now and get a free starter pack with this cool in-game loot. Once again, thanks to Raid for sponsoring this video. Now, second in F tier is Fuse's Ultimate, the Motherload. This ability is extremely lackluster, and it's kind of surprising it hasn't been reworked. It does 5 damage if you catch an enemy in it and they're able to escape within the first few seconds, but if they don't get out of the Motherload quickly enough, they'll take around 40 damage, and then it will tick for 8 damage for the next few seconds. This is where the ultimate can actually be good, but it's super hard to get an enemy to be in the Motherload unless they're extremely distracted in some other fight. But on top of all of that, the placement of it is very awkward. You can't really use it indoors without screwing yourself up or even your teammates up, because it slows your teammates. It's tough to see over the flames, so if it's shot indoors, it's all compacted and it's just a visual mess. And if you're outdoors, it's pretty easy to overshoot it or undershoot it, or just have that enemy run out within the first couple seconds. Not a great ability, F tier. Okay, moving on to the D tier abilities. First up is Octane's Jump Pad. Now, this ability is better than D tier if you play on mouse and keyboard and you can tap strafe. And that's because if you're hitting the pad and tap strafing, there's room to do some crazy movement that is fairly unpredictable and allows for you to outplay your opponents like crazy. Without tap strafing though, Octane's Jump Pad is very linear. It's very easy for enemies to track you while you're padding towards them or away from them. This ability is certainly fun, so don't get me wrong there. But as far as its utility in terms of being aggressive or using it as a team, it's not as good as it once was. At some point in the past seasons, they added the necessary audio to accompany players while they are traveling through the air or hitting the jump pad. This is very loud now, which it should be, but before, Octane's Pad didn't have that, and this made Octane's Pad honestly better because it allowed for people to sneak up on you flying through the air and then just drop on your head with a Mastiff. Like I said, fun ability, but I'm putting it in D tier unless you can tap strafe and do some crazy movement with it, and then from there, it's probably more like B or C tier. Second in D tier is going to be Newcastle's Wall. Now, this ability is way too sensitive when it comes to its placement. If you're in a pinch and you need to place the wall down and you move slightly left, right, back, forward, doesn't matter, the wall then totally reads a different area of where it wants to be placed, and that could totally screw up your plan of where you wanted to go with it. I just want a small tweak here for this ability to be much better, but I just don't think there's a ton of room for a skill gap with it. You could set out to use it at the best time and where you think the wall should connect to, and the game will just not make the read. So there's some nuance here, but I just don't love this ability for that reason. But the good things about this thing are you can attach to teammates when they're up ahead of you or on top of a building in front of you, and you can also use it to be offensive with if you want. You can push enemies back with this wall, and for that first 30 seconds, the wall will have that stunning effect effect, which can be helpful, but it's by no means as good as something like Gibby's Bubble in my opinion. Okay, moving on to the middle of the road abilities, C tier. First up is Watson's Generator, Pylon. This ability is definitely handy when you're trying to hold down areas. That passive shield regen is clutch, especially if you need to fight off enemies while it's passively shielding you. It blocks all incoming ordinances, which is clutch, but it does have a fairly long cooldown and it can be destroyed really easily. It doesn't take a heck of a lot of damage to shoot it out. Finding it can sometimes be the tough part, but if you work good angles and you have a good understanding of what's going on, destroying it shouldn't be too hard. Next in C tier is Ashe's Phase Tear. This thing is very similar to Newcastle's ult in the regard of how sensitive it is. You could try to place it in a certain area, slightly move forward, and then it reads like it's going to place it 2 feet in front of you. It's so different from something like Wraith's Portal where you're more in control of it. The thing I don't like about Newcastle's ult, Ashe's ult, and one more ult that I'll talk about later is you're at the whim of the game making these arbitrary reads on the map terrain. Now, sometimes, yes, it's on the user to be in the right areas that allow for an ability to be placed somewhere. But other times you're putting it in a spot where it should be able to go and the game is just not reading it correctly. And for that reason, I always have to ding these abilities in that regard because it's just not really helpful when you're in a pinch, and often you're going to be when you need to use something like a Phase Tear or a Newcastle Wall. Ashe's ult is helpful to be aggressive with, and sometimes if you want to escape, but other than that, it's pretty lackluster. Okay, next up is Ballistic's Ultimate. Now, when I did my tier list at the beginning of the season, I said Ballistic was a middle of the road legend, and a lot of people disagree with me, but I haven't seen a ton of him as the season's progressed on, and I still think he's right in the middle of the pack. The best part about him is definitely his ultimate, but in reality, this ability only slightly enhances the gunplay in a fight. So it's not OP or it doesn't overwhelm me, it's just mid. Not terrible, but not amazing, and that's a fine spot for a legend's ultimate. Moving on to Crypto. Now his EMP is situationally strong. However, it can hinder teammates with the slowing and stunning effects that it causes, which makes placing this and using it in a perfect moment kind of difficult. It deals 50 damage to enemies and it only takes about 6 seconds to pop 2 cells or 5 seconds to pop a battery, so you really have to be within that range where EMPing them and stunning them doesn't screw up your teammates, but it also is in a spot where your teammates can play off of that damage. I will say this ability is great at destroying defensive legends setups like Watson's, Caustic's, Ramparts, but it's not always the most practical ability if you don't get some time to set it up first, and it takes a lot of coordination. Second to last in C tier is Catalyst's Dark Veil, her wall. We see a lot of Catalysts in ALGS, and this is because of how the wall can be helpful to block off other teams' lines of sight. However, in different environments like normal pubs or ranked matches, this ability can often screw up teammates or make getting a kill much harder. It's totally situational, and how much damage you're doing in the engagement is super relative to how important this ability can be or cannot be. But I like the concept of the ability, but I find it's just not super pragmatic in a lot of fights. And lastly, in C tier, we have Maggie's Wrecking Ball. And Respawn, if you're listening, I'm begging you to fix this ability. There's no way this ability should stun and deal damage to Maggie, and it also shouldn't stun teammates. And this happens way too much. It makes the ball very inconsistent. Not only with will it come back and hit me, but also where will it land? It's tough to build a skill gap with this ability with just how it has a mind of its own. When it works, it can be fun and it can make getting a kill or two much easier, especially when you bounce that enemy and then run up on them with a shotgun. But overall, it's the inconsistencies here that kill me. Okay, now moving on to B tier, some of the better ultimate abilities in the game. First up is Lifelines. Now this is really helpful for shield batteries, for better armor, or weapon attachment upgrades, not only for yourself, but your squad as well. A couple seasons ago, it got buffed to where it comes down very quickly now, so you don't really get jumped if you're waiting for a lifeline package anymore. However, it will still alert any nearby enemy teams that you have called down a lifeline package, and if they have a decent game sense, they can figure out that's not a game package and there's a lifeline team over there. So I don't love it for that reason, and I also know a lot of people would probably rather see a different ultimate ability for lifeline, but I think it provides a great supportive value for your team and for yourself, and it can also double as some cover if you're ever in a pinch or in an endgame situation. Next, we've got Gibraltar's Defensive Bombardment. Now this ultimate is on a 4-minute and 30-second cooldown. It is strong, particularly in endgames or to get a team off of a building or something, but it's not the best because of how long it takes to get the ultimate back. I don't think it should be on a shorter cooldown. Maybe 4 minutes would be okay, but anything below that, I think this ability would be very, very overpowered. However, it's a strong ability. It's just not a lot of gibbies are out there using it, and there are some decent ways to avoid this bombardment if you need to. So B tier for now. Third is going to be Vantage's sniper rifle. Now, I know this thing is not super popular, but it's really strong and really easy to use. Two tapping a player on white armor, or if you hit a headshot, is actually really overpowered and can tilt the fight in your favor very quickly. The laser beam is the drawback because people who are smart can typically avoid the sniper, especially if you shoot one and miss and then they're aware of it being in play. The other downside is it's not always the best ultimate ability. It's kind of a weird ability. Like, it's strong, but it also doesn't really feel like the normal ultimate in the game, and that's because it's a sniper. So I enjoy using her because of the sniper, but I think it should be buffed, and I think an additional bullet in it could help with a trade-off for some lower damage or something like that. Second to last in B tier is going to be Wraith's Portal. This ability is probably more deserving to be an A tier because it did get buffed a couple seasons ago to where it now has a longer distance. However, portaling is not always the best utility when it comes to some of the movement legends. When you think about some of the other movement abilities, Wraith's Portal certainly isn't at the top, but it's also not at the bottom, and I think B tier is good for that reason. Sometimes if you use it to escape, there's just not enough time to get the Wraith Portal down and to make it worthwhile, whereas other times if you want to initiate some contact by getting closer to an enemy squad, it can be very helpful, and it's also really helpful in these late game scenarios where there's a lot of traffic nearby and you need to sneak somewhere into a building or somewhere behind some cover, and having your whole team run there might not be feasible. It's definitely much better than Ashe's ultimate, but I think B tier is a great spot for it. Lastly, we're going to talk about Seer's ultimate. I know Seer did get kind of nerfed and buffed, but really his ultimate got nerfed. You can't throw it as far. It doesn't always show enemies with that diamond on them anymore unless they're shooting for 1.25 seconds. So you really have to reflect down on the bottom of your screen to see how many enemies are near you or in the range if they obviously aren't right in front of you. And so I think it's still a strong ultimate ability. It's ultimately some form of wall hack, right? But at the end of the day, it's not as good as it once was. And I think we're in a state here where its tactical is just so much better. Okay, moving on to some of the better abilities, A tier. First up is Loba's ultimate, Black Market. Now this ability is super helpful for teammates and for Loba herself, especially when it comes to things like additional ammo, heals, attachments for weapons. I think it's a really practical ability. It doesn't always move the mark in terms of how things turn out, but it's a subtle ability, right? Like having enough ammo or upgrading your weapons slightly or finding that better armor can later turn out to be a game-changing thing for you and your team. I love this ability for what it is, and I think it's perfect. Next, we've got Pathfinder's Zipline. The best part about this is how fast and how far you can travel now. And also with his passive being able to scan those care packages and getting that ultimate back right away sort of doesn't make sense, but it makes this ultimate much better. I think this is really feasible for long rotations, taking high ground, getting out of hectic situations. Overall, it's probably the better utility when it comes to navigating you and your squad, but also it's not like Valkyrie's ultimate where there's a lot of readability on the takeoff. Pathfinder's Zipline, it's actually going to be really tough to track a lot of enemies while they're flying on that zipline unless they're coming right at you and they're right in front of your face. Third is going to be Rampart's Sheila. This thing is slept on by a lot of players and they underestimate it when they go up against one. You do not want to underestimate Sheila. This thing will melt you quicker than any other gun in the game. And yes, it has a spin up and a laser and some audio indicators to let you know that it's nearby. But I mean, I think this thing's really strong and it probably could go in S tier for what it is. It's not always the most practical ability because pulling it out during combat, you need some time. You need to be able to be prepared for an enemy. And that's sometimes possible, but not always possible. So that's why I have it in A tier for now. Moving on to Bloodhound's Beast of the Hunt. Now, Bloodhound's ult was changed a couple seasons ago, as most of you know, and you don't get to scan as much. So for that reason, I got to put it in A tier. You get a speed boost, your enemies are highlighted in red, and you get the White Raven that will lead you to the nearest enemy or an enemy team. It's a great ability to figure out where people are at and what direction to move in live time. And also, I think the highlighting and the speed boost makes this ultimate the best part about it. It used to be S tier. I think A tier is a healthy spot for it. And I think it's more balanced now too. So I'm happy with where it's at. Second to last is Bangalore's Rolling Thunder. Strong, but not amazing. It's tough to navigate through this if you want to push an enemy team while the Bangalore ult is landing. It also can slow down and stun your teammates. They don't take damage from it, but that can complicate the fight somewhat. You get that blurred vision if you get stunned by it, and you could easily get one clipped if you get stunned. So you got to be careful with it. It's good at moving teams back, or if you have a down in an open area, preventing them from being able to revive, all of that. But a quick Horizon Q can just get you right out of the Bangalore's ult. So there's some outplay there. You can also easily find a safe spot most of the time when the Rolling Thunder is coming down to just flat out avoid it, which is very different to how like Gibby's ultimate is, where it's more compact. I think it's a top tier ability, but I don't think it's S tier. And lastly, we have Valkyrie's Skyward Dive. This ability, once again, used to be S tier, but with the additions of the evac tower and with the nerfs it's received slowly over the course of the past seasons, it's just not as good as it once was. You can really prevent a Valkyrie and her team from taking a ton of space with this ability. It's fairly easy to shoot an enemy while they're flying through the air on Valkyrie's ult. You can prevent the takeoff from happening if you get there quick enough, and it doesn't move you or your teammates as far if you're using it. So once again, not S tier, but still a top tier ability in A tier. Now lastly, moving on to the S tier abilities. We've only got a few here. First is Mirage's Life of the Party. And I know this might sound crazy, but this ability in combat is very useful. A lot of players will not know who the real Mirage is if they don't see the Mirage decloak. There's just too much happening and it happens so fast. If you've got line of sight and you quickly start shooting, obviously they'll know, but if you get the first blow there in the fight, you're probably killing one person and then having a distraction to reassess or back up and heal. It's really, really strong in 1v1 combat, but the key is just not activating it right in front of your enemies so that they're able to tell which one is the real you. Second is Caustic's Nox Gas Grenade. This ability is situational, has a fairly long cooldown, but once you get it and you come up against an enemy in a close range combat, it can single-handedly just win you the fight. I mean, you still got to shoot your gun and stuff, but that enemy's going to be slowed, stunned, can't see well, taking health damage, and it's really easy to catch a one clip with this thing. If you come across the passive team that's holding up in a specific area, if you're able to get that Nox gas in there, it's going to clear them out of that space, and it's going to allow for you and your team to create a huge opening and eventually trying to win that fight. I really do love Caustic's ultimate. Lastly, we've got Horizon's Black Hole. This has been nerfed over the course of the seasons, but it still single-handedly can flip a fight in your favor. Accompany it with a few grenades or just catching one enemy while they're getting sucked by the black hole. It's pretty free. There's really no other ultimate in the game, I think, that is as game-changing and really tough to combat. Yeah, I know people can shoot it out, or if they get a quick read on it, they can escape it, but that isn't always possible, and I think this ability is still pretty broken. I will say, though, it has much more of a skill gap than it once used to. I feel like if anybody threw this in the past with just one arc star, it was going to do something. Now, it takes a little bit more nuance. You have to place it right. You have to make a good read on where the enemies are. It kind of also has a wonky hitbox. If you're trying to throw it and you're behind some cover or you're near cover, it can nick that cover and then not go where you want it to. But besides all of that, it's still game changing, especially in a lot of fights. If you enjoyed this video and you want to learn all about these 20 things that used to be in Apex Legends, be sure to check out this video next. Oh, and be sure to subscribe if you already aren't. Peace.